Okay, so today we're going to do something a little different. We're not going to talk about capitalism like it's some dry, dusty textbook theory. No, we're going to treat it like a person, a character with this long, dramatic, and let's be honest, often super controversial life story. Let's start at the very beginning of this biography.
All right. So when I say capitalism, what pops into your head? Probably Wall Street, right? Or maybe the Industrial Revolution. Adam Smith, that whole deal. It just feels like a modern idea, doesn't it? But what if I told you its story goes way, way back?
Yeah, you're seeing that right. 1800 BC. The basic idea, buying stuff, selling it for more, turning a profit, that's ancient. We've got actual evidence from 1800 BC of people setting interest rates on loans just so they could trade more. I mean, think about that. The core DNA of capitalism was there almost 4,000 years ago. Okay, but before we really get into the nitty-gritty of its life story, let's make sure we're on the same page. Who is this main character? What is capitalism at its absolute core? So, at its heart, it's really all about this dynamic of supply and demand. You've got traders trying to sell at the highest price they can possibly get. But, and this is the key part, in a healthy system, you've also got competition from other sellers. And that competition is supposed to keep prices from getting totally out of control. At least, that's the theory. All right, so let's get back to the story, back to the very beginning, to capitalism's childhood. It was let's say, a long and slow infancy, but you could already see its key personality traits starting to peek through. Huh, and you thought your credit card's interest rate was high? Just look at this. Back in ancient Babylon, rates could shoot up to 50%. It just goes to show that drive to make a profit on your money, it is nothing new. So this timeline here really shows you how the idea grew and changed over thousands of years. We take this huge leap from Babylon all the way to 14th century England. Now, something huge happens here, the Black Death. It was a total catastrophe, right? It wiped out so much of the population that suddenly the workers who survived were super scarce, and because of that, way more valuable. Their power to negotiate went way up. Then, jump forward another century to Italy, and things start getting a lot more sophisticated. You see the rise of these incredibly powerful merchant and banking families. And this is absolutely crucial to understand. That classic tension we talk about between the owners, the capital, and the workers, the labor, that's not some modern thing from the Industrial Revolution. Nope. The very first recorded strike by underpaid workers, it happened in 15th century Italy in the cloth industry. This conflict is basically woven right into the fabric of capitalism's DNA from the very early days. So, if the ancient world was its childhood, then this next phase, this period of huge global expansion, that was its adolescence. And like any teenager, it was turbulent, it was full of risk-taking, and yeah, it was often pretty dangerous. Long before Gordon Gekko ever said greed is good, there was this guy Jacques Coeur. We're talking about a 15th century French mega tycoon. I mean, this guy was one of the first people to really embody that massive ambition and raw power of a capitalist titan. And he's actually the one who first said something along the lines of greed is good, showing this brand new, totally unapologetic attitude about chasing wealth. But here's the thing. His story is a huge cautionary tale. Couture's power got so big that it started to threaten the king, the state itself. He just went too far, became totally unaccountable, and it all came crashing down. He was thrown in prison, lost everything. It was a really early and really powerful lesson in what can happen when capital gets too big for its britches. And we have to talk about the really, really dark side of this expansion. The trade routes that built incredible fortunes and laid the foundation for capitalism in America, well, they were built in large part on the absolutely monstrous exploitation of the slave trade. And that inherent injustice, that horror, also sparked some of the very first organized calls for moreland economic reform. All right, so this brings us to the moment that capitalism really grew up, the Industrial Revolution. This is the point where it goes from being just an influential idea to the dominant global force we know today. This is where it truly comes of age. So what was the big game changer? One word, machines. The rise of the machine era, it put absolute rocket boosters on capitalism. It completely changed the scale and the speed of production forever. And you can see the chain reaction right here. First, machines create these incredible gains in efficiency. Stuff can be made way faster and cheaper. Second, that new efficiency leads to profits that just skyrocket. We're talking massive new wealth. And third, to kind of justify and support all this growth, a new economic theory pops up, laissez-faire. It's French for let it be, and it basically argued that the government should just keep its hands off the economy.
But, of course, with all this new power and influence came its greatest intellectual rival. The stage was now set for the Great Debate, a showdown of ideas that would define politics and economics for the next 150 years. And honestly, it's a debate we're still having today.
And here are the two competing visions. On one side, you've got laissez-faire capitalism. Its supporters see it as a natural, efficient system driven by supply and demand. On the other side, you have Karl Marx, who just throws a bomb into the whole discussion. He argued that capitalism wasn't the end of history, it wasn't some permanent state. He saw it as just a temporary phase that would, one day, collapse under the weight of its own internal problems and contradictions. Now, the biggest real-world experiment to try and put Marx's ideas into practice on a massive scale was, of course, the Russian Revolution. But as history showed, it ultimately failed to create a viable, sweeping alternative. Instead, it led to authoritarianism and eventually economic collapse. And capitalism? Well, it turned out to be incredibly tough, incredibly resilient. Think about it. It got knocked down hard by the crash of the 1920s, it survived the Great Depression, and through it all, it just kept bouncing back, each time becoming more complex, more sophisticated, and even more dominant on the world stage. So where does all this leave our main character today? After centuries of growing, fighting, and adapting, you could almost say capitalism has entered a kind of midlife crisis. It's facing some new, really profound questions about its own future. Yeah, that global financial crash back in 2007, 2008, that was a massive shock to the system, a real wake-up call. It basically reignited a lot of these old debates and forced a whole new generation to ask some really tough, searching questions about how fair and stable our global economy actually is. And look, these are the exact questions we are all grappling with right now. How do we deal with the massive wealth inequality that the system seems to create? Does global capitalism need stronger checks and balances to stop the next crisis before it starts? The next chapter in this biography, well, it's being written as we speak. Karl Marx had a pretty sharp way of putting it. He once said, "The last capitalist we shall hang will be the one who sold us the rope." It's a really provocative line, right? But it perfectly captures that central contradiction that he saw at the heart of the whole system. So, that's really the question this whole story leaves us with, isn't it? Will those internal contradictions that Marx talked about eventually be capitalism's undoing? Or is its greatest strength its almost endless ability to adapt, to evolve, and, hey, even to profit from its own crises? In other words, are we going to continue buying shares in the company that makes the rope?